Goodell, and he's going to talk to us about pesticides and IPM alfalfa. And again, I just want to thank him for being here on. I mean, he's a short timer. He was
Very
ready to
short.
come. So.
This is my last official extension meeting. So I couldn't ask for a better place to have it than in Dos Palos. And I'm serious about that. It's only been close to me because this is where I started my integrated pest management career in 1974. Living at the end of Orticulita Road and working for a guy that had all sorts of fields from, oh gosh, we did a lot of work around here in Dos Palos. So this is like back home, plus as I've given talks about alfalfa, this is where IPM really started, was right here in this area with the supervised control concepts in the late 40s and the early 1950s.
So I'm going to also try him exactly the same.
Yeah, we're still getting out there, yeah. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk very briefly today about it. I handed you a lot of information, don't worry, I'm not going to cover it. It's really the background information that you've seen over the years, but I wanted to make sure you have it because I think this is all relevant to the sustainable farming systems program that's you're here to hear about or you're already enrolled in. So, while she's doing that, I'm going to talk about some pesticides and IPM related to alfalfa. I just want to let you know that one of the things I'm going to continue to do over the next 18 months is continue with a statewide project called Pesticides and IPM. That's a contract with DPR, it's a public policy development, where we're actually putting together, our last meeting is tomorrow. We've been looking at representatives, talking to representatives from all quarters of California agriculture, structural industry, as well as managed and unmanaged landscape, everything from environmental justice folks to the crop protection registrants in the same room over many locations. Trying to find the commonality we all have in why do we need to manage pests, how can we have to use pesticides, and just seeking input to see if we can in some way develop some full way forward to begin to break this deadlock we have with it's either one or the other, because we all manage pests. So that brings us to sort of this concept here of why the Sustainable Farming Project has a suggested do not use list, and why they're even in existence. So it's this one here, it's the chemicals to avoid for 2017. And so really what you see there, I'm just going to talk about insecticides or organophosphates. And why is that? It's the worker safety issues, it's the potential drift issues, it's the runoff issues into the waters. I will say that right now, I believe it's a public comment, and Jim or Matt can correct me on this, but there's a public comment period right now as they look at pyrethroids for the same water quality issues, particularly in the sediments. So they're doing a complete review of that. So a lot of the shift went from organophosphates, that's Lorsban and dimethoate and some of those, to pyrethroids over the last 5 to 10 years. And now they're saying, oh, well, not saying, but they're saying, oops, we didn't realize how much sedimentation is going to go into the water. So the point here is that we're trying to avoid, one, and I'll get back to this point, that we're being good stewards of the environment, that we're taking these things seriously, that we don't want unintended consequences, and that some of these products tend to have, some of those AIs tend to have a little bit more ability to get out there. So one of the things that's requested is that Lorsban and other names of chlorpyrifos, is to be used only when critically necessary. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today is this is the results of a large program we had again with the state to look at and asking 4 major commodities in the state, what are your critical uses? Where do you have, why do you need it, and where is it most critical? So we met with cotton, alfalfa, citrus, and almonds, and pulled together a lot of information, put together a nice report, and I think it's influenced, to some extent, as much as we can influence, both DPR and EPA, because they've talked to us a number of times about, well, how did the process run, why were they critical, how do you define criticality, and all that kind of stuff. That's not important here. What is important is these use patterns. Because DPR doesn't require us, when we put a recommendation out there, to identify the target, We just have to identify the site. What are you putting it on? That's their interest. And if it's labeled for it by the company, it says we have efficacy. So unlike Arizona that actually records what insects you're using this insecticide against, we don't do that, so we have to guess. We see these use patterns and we can see some things. One of the things that's unique about alfalfa is of the 3-4 crops, this is the only one that had this bimodal curve. So we look at this and we go, okay, here's the winter time, and here's the summertime. Okay, winter we talk about weevils, talk about aphids, we talk about those kinds of things. Okay. Do we have replacements for those? And the answer to that was very few for weevils. I mean, it's a critical product. That's really the keystone for a lot of the IPM. So what we would like to do is only use that that's critically necessary. Well, then we come into summer, and okay, there might be some cowpea aphid out there, but primarily it's summer worms. Do we have alternatives for summer worms? The answer is yes, we do. We used to have 2 alternatives. We used to have belt, but that's been pulled, and so we have coragen. So we have selective, and several others, BT insects, but a very selective product that works really well. Now the lecture in the pulpit I'm trying to deliver from the pulpit today is you've got alternatives. And by the way, let's take a step back. March 31st, EPA had to make a decision as to whether or not it was going to pull all food tolerances from chlorpyrifos, which was a ban. It did not happen. And there's a hue and cry about that, and there's either a hue and cry or people looking smugly saying, aha, they finally listened to the science. I would say that your industry and anyone who uses this AI got lucky, and you're under, they're basically are saying now, you got it, you can continue to use it, and we're going to watch you. We're going to see if you can use it like an adult can use it. So if you need to use it, follow the label and use it. If there's alternatives, we really need to show the public that in fact we can bring these numbers down and say we use it only when it's necessary. So how do we know when it's necessary? Well, one of those things that you have there is written on the top. Well, a couple of things. This thing here is how to get to the online tool that we're going to talk about in a minute. So take a look at that. It's a great decision tool. And then this sheet here, for anybody who's been to these talks, you've heard me talk about this, so this isn't going to be. This guy here that says summer pests on it is the one we kind of want to focus on. So the support tool, you basically go there and you say, I want to control, in this case I selected alfalfa caterpillar, cowpea aphid, and western striped army. So 2 leps and an aphid. It goes into our pest management website. It takes all the data for those 3 pests, for biological, cultural, and insecticide, and puts them in one place for you to look at. It creates this table. So right on top, it's management options, and you have conservation of natural enemies, early harvest, border cutting, and chemical control. And those little dots there, if you happen to save this as a PDF on your smart device, those little dots there that say I, you can actually click on that and it'll take you to the website with that information. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I want to go through just very briefly that those are basically the biological and the cultural practices. When you see chemical control and you have that little water drop, if you were to click on that, it would quickly go through what the hazards are for those particular products listed for those insects. Mostly it's water runoff, impact on fish, impact on humans, based upon the pesticide screening tool that NRCS has out there. So you can basically go through there and say, can I use any of those management options? Then you say, but I also want to do a look at my chemical options. The chemical options then, put it out there where you see P1, P2, P3, it refers to these 3 pests, and it shows where a product could be used against 2 pests at once or all 3 pests at once. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want to be able to say, look, I've got 3 of them out there. I'm not going to use 3 different products. I'm going to use 1. It also tells you what the mode of action is, and that's important because resistance management. You don't want to keep putting 3As, 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 or 4As. You want to make sure you're moving those modes of actions around. It talks about selectivity. Is it a very narrow targeted, or is it more broad spectrum? What's the impact of predatory mites, general predators, parasites, and honeybees? And what's the duration? You got a complete list of everything, right down to, if you flip the page, is, it continues down there, talks a bunch of stuff on the footnotes, but down at the bottom it says mitigating pesticide hazards and precautions for using pesticides. If anybody asks, have you considered these mitigating and are you looking at safety? Just print that thing out. You've got it covered. Then the final pages are about the pest, the biology, and that kind of a thing, but what more did I wanted to say about that? It's more about the biology, sampling, identification, that kind of stuff. So, this gives you a way, and I look at this as not that I went to the field, or maybe I went to the field tomorrow and I found a lot of worms. What are my options? Well, you can actually go, if it's just worms, you can go to the Pest Management Guideline online and go through that. I look at this more as a planning tool. If you sat down in the winter time and you finally catch your breath, but what did we do last year? I'm getting ready to put my list together for permits for the Ag Commissioner. What did I use last year? And what are my other options? What else could I be thinking about? So, this kind of these are all the tools that could be in the toolbox. And this goes back to using the right tool at the right time. I often think about, I've got my toolbox and I've got electrical problems, so I take this is my left skill as a DIY guy. I take out my pipe wrench. That's not going to do me much good. In fact, I don't have anything for electrical problems in my toolbox. Oops. So I better call someone else out. So there are many tools, and you can't rely on a single tray because you don't know what the problem's going to be. So you have a lot of different tools. In our case, I often look at it and see the top one. You're in the midst of a crisis, perhaps. So you open it up, and that's where you grab that first tray. That first tray I consider to have are pesticides in it. Not an unimportant tray at all. I understand that. That's the great, our great ability to be able to take care of a problem when we have it. By the same token, that tray, there might be some tools that are better fitted than others. For example, you might think about, well, I've got some summer worms out there. I think I'll use Coragen, which is more selective, less impactful on my beneficial insects, and it avoids any particular problem that could end up with something like horse ban. And besides, I promised Marcia I would not try and avoid. I would try to avoid it this year. And she knows where you live. So, and then some of them, if you look at a toolbox for almonds, you've got a completely different set there. It's wider. In alfalfa, it's much smaller. You don't have very many neonicotinoids available to you. You don't have a lot of the newer materials that they haven't registered yet, so you've got to be careful about that. So you've got somewhat less of a tools available in that tray. Finally, that tray, which by the way, compared to where we were 30 years ago, has a lot more options. We have a lot more selective materials. The insecticide research that's gone on has provided us with a number of really, really great tools. But that tray is completely built up by private investment. It's expensive, multi-tens of millions of dollars to get a registration. That's all private investment, and it's a great thing to have. So we lift that tray off, and what do we have left in there? We've got cultural and biological management approaches. So where does that information come from? That's public sector investment. And what have we done for alfalfa in the last 35 years for building that? And the answer is almost nothing. Because we had a big move in the 80s and 90s. We had an IPM research program. It's when we had a whole team set up in the early 80s to look at the entire alfalfa system, from weeds to pathologists to nutrition, and that's where we got our pest management guidelines. But very little has been done since about 1995. Larry Godfrey had just started to work back on alfalfa weevil with a DPR grant. And fortunately, Larry passed several months ago. And Dan Putnam's going to try and help continue that. Some of you may be involved in this project, where he's actually trying to look back on what are our thresholds of weevil. You know, we're using different varieties, we're using different cutting techniques, everything is different from 35 years ago. So there's some new research that is going on, but it's public sector. And we lost all of our funding back about the mid-90s, or mid-2000s. University demanded, well, not demand, they needed 30% of our budget back, that's what we gave up. And I've been trying to make a case, and I will continue to make a case that needs to be restored so that we can move forward with independent IPM research that builds on the biology and looking for cultural options where we have them. So the toolbox is really important, but then we also want to make sure that, you know, we do measure twice and cut once. That's where I think this planning tool comes in. You can look at it and go, there are all my options in one place. I can look through them and see where do I want to go at least. And it may be that I mean, we're looking at cotton right now, and we don't, you know, if you haven't heard, for those of you cotton growers, it's the worst year for ligas in 35. We are talking about people who are seeing, where our threshold is 1 to 4 per 50 sweeps, we're seeing 20, 30, 40 per 50 sweeps. I've heard that it's not as bad up here, which is great, but for the last, you know, there are many places I know, from West Fresno County down to West Kern County, that have put on 3 applications already. And it's pretty horrendous out there. Which, by the way, they completely reset the biological control. It doesn't exist anymore. So now we're beginning to fight aphids. So this is going to be a tough year, to say the least. Just an FYI, we're working with Dow, we're working with DPR and the cotton industry to get a Section 18 for Transform. And I think we can make a case. I think maybe on a few cases, times we can make a case. So maybe there'll be another tool in the toolbox. But the key that I really wanted to tell you is that think about this first. Think about all your options and then start going through them. And the reason is this. And this is something that we don't talk a lot about, but we all know about it because we do it every day. We either look at a recommendation from your PCA or a PCA you sign a recommendation. It's the Environmental Impact Report, Functional Equivalency. When California started building its California Environmental Quality Act, about the same time the feds started it, we developed our own CEQA. Basically, they turned back to the state agencies and said, if you are going to provide a permit for somebody to put out a pollutant or toxicant in the environment, you need an environmental impact report. So PCH write a recommendation, you have to have a permit to do that, or a license, you need an EIR. So every spray you put on, somebody's got to do an environmental impact report. Sound reasonable? Sounds impossible? It isn't. It is impossible. And they realize it. So what they did, what their council did, is to come up with this functional equivalency of an environmental impact report. That's why we check off that little thing that says, I have certified that alternatives and mitigation measures that would substantially lessen significant adverse impact on the environment have been considered and feasible adopted. That's why we checked that off. That's why we checked it off for 30 years. It's a social contract with the people of California saying, we are using this because we have to. Now, how do you know you have to? DPR's never really taken that to task. I think they're going to start thinking about that. And I'll submit to you that this is one way. If you have this and you thought it through and say, you know, I can't use bacillus, I can't use this, I can't use that, and you can just sort of cross it off and say, I have considered it. I have considered it. I would love to be able to do border cutting to maintain my population of good guys out there. But I can't because my custom guy comes in and mows everything down while I'm asleep or something. You know? So it's just a matter of saying, I have considered them. And by the way, for mitigation, yeah, I read that thing here that says I clicked on and read that, yeah, I need to make sure that I follow the label, that if possible, I avoid any kind of drift, etc. My definition of whether, I mean, I have people tell me that, well, are they really doing IPM? Are they really doing IPM? I'm doing more IPM. To me, the amount per se doesn't matter. To me, it's the approach and taking the systems thinking, using something like this that matters. It means that there are some people who can do more and a neighbor who can do less. For resource reasons, for whatever it happens to be. But if you have thought about it, and you can, in my opinion, look yourself in the mirror and say, yeah, I've thought about everything, and yeah, I'm going to use chlorpyrifos for the following reasons. I would argue, going back to that statement about trying to reduce the use of chlorpyrifos and some of these other OPs, is you have alternatives, because you need chlorpyrifos in the spring. That's when you really need it. And if you lose it because somebody let something happen, and the public says, aha, we let you guys have it, and look what happened. Somebody went out and immediately abused it. They didn't warn the workers. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. They take it away. Now you've got a problem in spring. Some worms you take care of now, finally, because you can use the more expensive products. That's just my point that I'm trying to lead with today. Is the public is watching us. The public is saying, fine, you guys are, you're big boys and girls. You say you can do it, and we're going to watch. There's already been an incident down in Kern County. And I'm not clear on all the details of it, but it did somehow or another drift into 2 or 3 fields down, and it wasn't an immediate drift. I don't know the details, but I can assure you that people are taking notes on all these kinds of things. So we have to, if we want these tools, we absolutely have to manage them so that we have them in our toolbox. I think that's all I have today. Yeah. And I just wanted to say thank you all for coming today, and thank you all for letting me be part of your community and your lives. And I've just absolutely couldn't ask for a better career, and I'm not going to, apparently she knows where I live too, so this is one of the communities, one of the groups that I really want to continue to help support, help Damien out there, and continue to work with you, particularly in the cotton alfalfa. So thank you all very much, and I can take any questions if you have. And,